Let's go. Do we have sound? We have sound. I should have checked that first. Okay, so forgot to do a thing last night. Sorry to the 8 people who watched these. I wanted to do a reflection on COVID. I think I have, at least in popular discourse, somewhat of a unique view on the whole COVID situation. At least locally. I'm mostly going to be talking locally since like most of the people who watch these are people that I know. So I'll mostly be talking about Alberta. I had the sublime misfortune of having to go through the pandemic in a province that has some of the worst statistics concerning COVID. In fact, I did some calculations. Let me bring them up. Did some statistics here, which I probably could have just looked up, but I did it myself. This was a while ago as well. Where is it? It's in my phone. There it is. So I compared a few places for COVID statistics to Alberta. So Alberta has about its population density. Population density, I think, is very important when looking at pandemics and epidemics, because if you got people living closer together, they're going to infect each other more. Makes sense, right? If you're an epidemiologist, feel free to tell me I'm wrong, but I feel like that's a fairly logical inference to make. So Alberta has a population density very low. I mean, Canada in general, our population density is very low, since that's basically, we have no people and we're the second biggest country on Earth. So Alberta has a population density of 5.7 people per square kilometer. That's not a lot. We've got 2 big cities, it's Edmonton and Calgary. I live in Edmonton. So deaths per cases, percentage of cases that were deaths, 0.91. It's not terrible. Cases per capita, now just take the whole population and we'll divide the amount of cases by the entire population. You get 6.17% has had COVID. Now this is all from Google Statistics. Keep in mind, it was just a quick tally, but I'd like to think that they're somewhat reliable statistics, somewhat reliable numbers. Compare that to Ontario, which is obviously going to be a lot more populated. That's where most of the people in Canada live. And most of them live in the Great Lakes region of Ontario, not even the big part. You know what I'm talking about. Kind of looks like a fish, Ontario. The head of the fish. People don't really live there. But nonetheless, they have an average population density of about 14.1 people per square kilometer. That's almost 3 times ours. Their cases per capita were only 3.95%. It's just a bit more than half. Now, they did have worse deaths, 1.66%, which is a little bit worse than how we did. Canada as a whole, keep in mind that when you talk about population statistics with Canada, it's a little bit weird. Keep in mind that in Canada, around, I believe, 80% of people, of Canadian citizens, live within 100 kilometers of the U.S. border. And not a lot everywhere else. I mean, the rest of the 20% is, further north somewhere. Now, Canada has an average population density of 4.0 people per square kilometer. That's tremendously low. That's getting close to Mongolia, which is the least population dense country on Earth. Or it might not be now, but last time I checked, which was like a year ago or something. Now, cases per capita for Canada are around 4.02%. Keep in mind that's like every province, it's everywhere. And deaths per cases on average was 1.73%. That is the mean data. I should make that clear. It's of all the provinces. Now, compare this with a place like Germany, right? I have family there and friends. I know very well what it's like over there. Germany has a population of 240 people per square kilometer. Literally, just oodles above us, right? And their case rate per capita was 4.92%. Now, it's expected that it would be a bit higher than us. They've just got a lot more packed in like sardines. So that makes sense. But still, they have like 50 times population density, and the case rate per capita does not reflect that. So it indicates that we are doing something wrong in Canada, that we are doing something especially wrong in Alberta. Vietnam, which in my opinion is the shining example of how to handle a pandemic, and I think the numbers would agree with me. A lot of people say New Zealand as well. I bring up Vietnam to be a little bit provocative and use a socialist country. But New Zealand, you did a good job too. Good job, guys. Australia did do a good job. Until a few months ago, the Delta outbreak. Yeah, you know what happened there. So Vietnam has a population density of 311. If you haven't seen the borders of Vietnam, really tiny, skinny little funnel-shaped country that kind of widens out at the bottom again. It's like a funnel, and then it's like an hourglass, but like twisted. You know what it looks like. Go look it up. Very small country with very many people crammed into it. I believe it has around 96 million people or something, maybe 97. And their case rate per capita was 0.228125%. I put it to like a lot of digits because I just wanted to really drive it home that they haven't had many cases. And keep in mind, this was, I believe, in September that I compiled all of this. So as far as I know, Vietnam has had another outbreak, so it's probably gone up a little bit. But I'm sure it's still nowhere near what it's like here. And a lot of people, it's kind of weird. I mean, I'm all for universal healthcare, but a lot of people in Canada are like, oh, thank God for this thing that we have. Because, we're not all dying like in the States. Well, in the States, they had the deaths per case is about 1.4%. So it's actually a tiny bit better than us, if you can believe it. This doesn't really have to do with sort of how things are administered. It has to do with the political economy of who even gets COVID in the first place. Anyways, so I kind of wanted to reflect. I guess I'll tell my personal story of the pandemic because it's been a hell of a time for me. It has for anyone my age, especially university students. I thought that all was going well. I was getting my degree, and all of a sudden this comes along, and I can't do half of these classes that I need to graduate, and it threw a real spanner into things. So I am a dorm guy. I live in dorms. Always have. I enjoy it. I enjoy being around academic thinking people. Nothing against people who aren't like that. Ultimately, my socialism is for everyone. But I prefer to be around people who ask questions. It's what I like doing. And so I've always lived in dorms, and basically they told us to go home in March of 2020. I remember it was about a week after my birthday when I turned 21. I'm 22 now. So everyone was sent home. We had to get out. I remember hearing all these things like, oh, it's probably only going to be like 2 weeks. Only going to be 2 weeks. Don't worry about it. Like, these sorts of things happen all the time. They don't. It ended up being a year and a half. I mean, I would say that the pandemic is still going on. Many pandemics last several years, even modern ones. H1N1 was a concern for a very long time. It's just that we don't really remember it, because it wasn't as dangerous. Well, I don't know if that would be the right adjective, but it wasn't as all-encapsulating as this pandemic has been on like every facet of life, right? It hasn't been as threatening as H1N1 wasn't really as threatening of a pathogen either, because the big thing with COVID is that it's asymptomatic up until a few days after you get it, after you actually contract it. So you could be passing it on to all sorts of people and not even know that you have it, which is a real problem. One thing that I really want to drive home about COVID is, yes, anti-maskers, anti-vaxxers, they're clearly uneducated or misinformed. In fact, I would say more that they're misinformed than uneducated. Really, being uneducated is sort of, maybe it would make you more susceptible to buying into certain misinformation. However, it's the misinformation itself that is the largest problem. And I hold that these people have not committed any moral failure. Now, this is not to say that they're correct. They're clearly incorrect and their worldview is unscientific. But why is that? A few things that I can kind of give to these people is that during the early stages of the pandemic, when we were still discussing masks, when everyone was still learning about why masks work, how they work, whether or not this new hydroxychloroquine thing was legit, there was a lot of the WHO and the CDC were really kind of bouncing around. And that's to be expected in science. That's not to say that these institutions are unaccountable or any of these things. They certainly are. Their purpose is to fight against things like this. And they will commit any effort necessary to it. And they are international organizations. They're not controlled by any shady interest. However, the main issue was that they sort of put out information without thinking of the ramifications, would be my one criticism. Because it wasn't exactly clear to anyone at that time, even a lot of experts, whether or not certain things worked, whether or not certain things should be advised against, things like that. And that's, yeah, like I said, it's understandable, but I think they sort of lacked responsibility in the way that they proliferated that information to the public. Bad PR, basically. We'll chalk it up to bad PR. What else? The issue that I see with blaming anti-vaxxers and anti-maskers for everything is that you're kind of ignoring the political economic imperatives which led to this mismanagement, particularly in Alberta, our ruling UCP, United Conservative Party. Everyone seemed to just forget that this is a party with heavy industrial interests behind it, and heavy lobbying interests from those industrial interests behind it. When a crisis comes in which the best way to solve it and the best way to keep it from getting worse is to have people stay at home away from their jobs for a while, or if they are at their jobs, be equipped with free personal protective equipment and things like that. Of course, this government, which is so lobbied by these interests, by the interests of capital, of course they're going to resist all of those things. Of course they are. Because they know who keeps them in nice suits. Jason Kenney, our premier, he knows who keeps him in a nice suit and out of his mother's basement. So, that's sort of what's going on in Alberta, is very sort of, I have no better term, I want to keep this clean, but half-assed pandemic measures, pandemic restrictions. These restrictions are not irrational. They are not stupid. This is something that I'm kind of parroting Michael Parenti at the moment, where he talks about foreign policy. It's the same thing. These are not irrational things that our government is doing. Our government is not stupid. They're not doing this because they're stupid or irrational. They're doing these things because it's fundamentally in their interest. It might not be in a human interest, in the interest of preserving as much life as possible, an actual proper utilitarian interest, which can only come from the social contract. This is openly being denied by this government for their interests, not because they're stupid, but because it's what keeps them wealthy. And this is by no means a conspiracy. Lobbying information, campaign donations, it's all readily available. You just look it up on the Alberta legislature has this all on file, and on their website you can go and look it up, as well as the federal government. And when you read this stuff, you immediately realize what the interest behind this. It's right there, plain as day. The only thing is that nobody really knows that there's a database where you can look up lobbying information for political parties, for individual politicians sometimes. Even if it's not in there, there's still a great deal. I mean, don't be so naive. There is still a great deal of under the table deals going on. There always is in any government. It's unavoidable. And some of them get unearthed, some of them don't. I think it's pretty naive to think that all of them are exposed, that people always meet justice. This is it's sometimes not the case, I'm not saying, inherently don't trust the government. It's just, I think it's a simple aspect of maturity that you acknowledge that the world is somewhat corrupt, that governments are somewhat corrupt, especially when they act in capital interest, in moneyed interest. So that's kind of all I have to say about the pandemic, is I think people just simply choosing a scapegoat among the population rather than the people who are actually mismanaging it. I think it's a real problem. And it kind of shows what I always call the left's, the Western left's fear of populism. We so fear populism because liberalism has so deeply ingrained itself within our outlooks that populism is just simply, it is always presented to us as unworkable, as authoritarian, as a very common thing is white-centric or Anglo-centric or Eurocentric, whereas populism is how every progressive political change has occurred throughout history. Almost all of them, I'd argue. Any revolution that you look at is a populist enterprise, because it must be. And so yeah, maybe that will be my next topic when I do this next. I don't know when I'll do this next. I'm busy as hell lately doing school stuff. It's almost the end of the semester. I got finals in 2 weeks. I'm getting my wisdom teeth taken out pretty soon. I'm scared. I'm gonna have holes in my mouth. I'm gonna be bleeding out of my mouth constantly. I'm going to like be in huge pain for probably like a week. It's gonna suck. Maybe I'll do a stream. I don't know. Maybe I'll just do a bunch of meme streams at that time. That'll be my reward for being a brave boy and getting my teeth taken out. Who knows? Anyways, I'm rambling. Goodbye, everyone. Hopefully you actually watch this one.